Hey everybody, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host of the Dark Stuff channel here on YouTube. Thanks so much for checking out my latest video. As always, it is much appreciated. This week, you're tuned into a very special one. This is the premiere episode of a brand new series I'm starting for 2025. I think it's going to do really well. I'm going to continue to explore the depths of my hair metal past, only I will not be doing this one alone. And my new series, Rock of Aging, will feature a great new co-host named Erika. And let's go ahead and meet this new co-host. Let me just set the stage a little bit here. So she and I met maybe, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so at an LA Guns Cinderella concert, or a Tom Kiefer band concert. Became fast friends, realized we had this sort of similar background of growing up in the Midwest, loving this kind of music, and continuing to have a fascination with that era and with that music still at this point in our lives. So hence the Rock of Aging. And we then sort of solidified this idea, believe it or not, at a Faster Pussycat concert where we were both there and figured, you know what, this is something definitely worth pursuing. And let me give a trigger warning right now. People who get upset about the term hair metal, I get it. Okay, it is borderline offensive, but nobody called it that back in the day. We all know that. However, it is kind of a marketing term and people do sort of get it. And we're just using it just for descriptive purposes. It's not meant as sort of like a put down or anything like that. We're coming to this as fans, not as detractors of this type of stuff. So having said all of that, let's introduce my co-host, Erika. And I thought we would start with a couple of questions so the audience can, I mean, I'm assuming you guys all know me because I've been on this channel for many, many years. There's 300 videos you could look at if you want to see like a little bit more about me. But you probably don't know about Erika, as she does have her own podcast, and you can see the name on the top there or on the screen. I'll put a link to it below. There's a YouTube component and then like an audio component. I'll link to the YouTube one so you can see some of the stuff on there. So let's go ahead and start with a series of 5 questions that I thought would be good for the audience to kind of, you know, get to know you.
I'm ready. And thanks for having me, by the way. I'm so excited to start the Rock of Aging podcast segment. This will be so fun. And by the way, Dave came up with this name and I think it's brilliant because, you know, we're aging, but we still love the rock.
We are aging. We're aging gracefully, though, I would say, especially, well, you so more than me, but regardless. So let's go ahead and start with these 5 introductory questions. Nothing too complicated, but let's start off with, who is your favorite band or artist of all time?
Well, I feel very obligated to say that my favorite band of all time is Motley Crue because I have such an alliance to that band. Now, I will say that I have seen Motley Crue several times over the course of the last few years. They've, of course, been on their stadium tour, and I've seen them perform, you know, all the way back from the 80s until now. I am sort of... I can't say that I'm getting tired of Motley Crue. That would never be the right phrase to use, but I am ready for Motley Crue to start doing something different. And they kind of are now because they have John 5 as part of the band. Unfortunately, of course, McMars is no longer traveling with the band or touring with them or performing. But I'm kind of ready for a glow up where Motley Crue is concerned. I feel like they're getting a little stale and some of their show elements are the same and the same and the same. So I am going to stand by my answer. It's sort of a long answer, but Motley Crue is my favorite band. I'm not ready to give that up yet.
Excellent. Okay. So question number 1, favorite band was Motley Crue. Question number 2, what would be the first, you know, metal or hard rock record that you purchased with your own money? And I qualify that because a lot of people get records when they're kids. I had Donnie and Marie records and whatnot. That stuff doesn't count. I'm saying when you saved up your allowance or your part-time job or whatever it was you were doing, and you were like, I'm going to the store and I'm getting this album. What do you remember as the first one you got?
Well, I distinctly remember my dad driving me over to Uncle John's, which was a record store in Sioux City, Iowa, which was the area that I grew up in. Maybe some listeners are familiar with Uncle John's. It was pretty iconic back in the day if you were from the Sioux City area. And he allowed me to purchase with my own money New Jersey, which was Bon Jovi's not second release, but for me, it was the second release because I had really gotten to know Bon Jovi through Slippery When Wet, was anxiously awaiting the release of New Jersey. And so New Jersey would be the album that I remember going to purchase with my own money. It was a cassette, but I do remember purchasing it with my own money.
Yeah, hard to believe that cassettes were at one point like a viable option. Like, I really don't get it. I bought tapes back in the day, and when I see that they're trying to make a return,
Yeah,
I'm just like,
weird.
why? How
It was
dumb is
so
that?
hard even to just like navigate cassettes, like more than any other media format. It's like, where does the song start? Where does the song end? I mean, it was just so hard to like even like get to the point in
And
the
they broke
song
all the time.
recording that you wanted to listen to.
The more you rewind, and it breaks all the time. It's just
Oh,
stupid.
yeah.
Stupid. So, okay, next question. What would you say was your first real rock concert that you attended?
Well, I know this because my co-host of the A92A podcast, Tina, who is one of my childhood best friends and lives in Los Angeles now, we were just talking about this the other day. It was Poison with Brittany Fox. That show was November 2nd of 1988, and we saw it in Sioux City at the old auditorium in Sioux City, Iowa. Coincidentally, November 2nd ultimately became my son's birth date. He was born on November 2nd, but that was also the first time that I saw a real rock show live and in person. It wasn't my first concert. My first concert was actually Michael Jackson when he was on tour with his brothers in like 1985.
That's so great.
But my first rock show was Poison and Brittany Fox. And we actually got out of, there's a whole story aligned with that. We got out of school early. It was a whole thing. But yes, that was the first show.
Nice. And that sort of answers the question for me in that, how did I see Brittany Fox? Because I know that I saw them. I must have seen them open for Poison because I saw Poison in 1988 as a headliner. And so it must have been Brittany Fox. Okay, because I knew I'd seen them. Left an indelible mark on me, I guess.
Man, by the way, that's a show I would like. Tina and I were just talking about this. I would love to see that show right now. Poison with Brittany Fox. I don't think Brittany Fox, they tour. They have a band still, but of course it's not the original.
Different. Didn't they get a different singer like pretty early on?
Yeah, I think Dizzy Dean Davidson, who was originally with the band and kind of had that Tom Kiefer-ish sort of like growl to his voice or kind of screech tone to his voice. He left the band quite some time ago. I think there was some controversy and some infighting there, but yeah.
Because I think he did that voice. I think he did that voice on purpose to sound more like Tom Kiefer. Yeah, I don't think that's like the way his voice is supposed to sound. I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, I think because he did some other band afterwards, Black Cherry or Black Eyed somebody or other. I'll have to Google it. I'll put it up on the screen. And I know he didn't sing like that. He didn't do that Kiefer sort of element. So it's weird.
Yeah. I remember that as well. I feel like very firmly it hit me. I lived in Dallas, Texas for my seventh grade year, most of my seventh grade year. And I hated it. It was very difficult moving from a small town in Nebraska, South Sioux City, Nebraska, which is where I grew up, to move to a massive school in Dallas, Texas. Very difficult transition. So luckily for me at the time, I didn't stay in Dallas for long. I moved back, I think, in August of 1987, which would have been the summer before I started my 8th grade year. And that summer of 87, was a big summer for this kind of music. It was. And I remember watching Poison's I Won't Forget You video and feeling like, these are my people. Like, there's something about this music that is absolutely captivating to me. And so I distinctly remember the I Won't Forget You video by Poison was like the moment that I knew I was going to have a very long love affair with this kind of rock music.
So you're probably 14 or 15, probably when that came out. Okay.
Yep. I think 14. That's probably right. Actually, maybe even 13.
That makes sense because it's, similar for me. It was a pinch earlier, maybe 3 when I was maybe 12. And it just kind of kicked into high gear at that point and became a borderline obsession for me for a number of years. With
What's
that.
interesting is I remember Motley Crue. So I remember listening to Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil album with a friend of mine when it first came out. And so that would have been years before, like whenever Shout at the Devil came out. I don't know. I just remember I was a little kid and I listened to this album with her for the first time. It was her brother's album because her brother was a big Motley Crue fan. And I remember thinking, this is really scary stuff. Like, this is unsettling to me. Like, if you listen to the first part of Shout at the Devil, it's the scary like voice and it's just like kind of in, like doom and gloom. And so I remember thinking this is super scary, but also being kind of intrigued by it. And then I kind of sat for a long time and I went through my 80s pop era and I loved Prince and I loved Madonna and Michael Jackson and all of the 80s pop icons. And then though came back to the 80s metal when, you know, I kind of got that hit, you know, when 80s metal was everywhere. It was charting on all of the charts. It was on every single playlist on MTV. It was everywhere. And so that's when I really started to dig back into that music. Yes, back then, probably in maybe the 9th grade, I asked for and received for Christmas one year an electric guitar. And I was sure that that was going to be my calling, that that was sort of my intro into this world. Because, you know, it's interesting too, because, and we talk about this a lot on our podcast, Tina and I, being females and being fans of this music, we didn't have a lot of female role models to look up to. You know, really the female interaction with this music was groupie based. You know, it was like the video vixen. It was the girls that followed after these guys. It wasn't a power stance in terms of like female presence where 80s metal is concerned. And so I really felt confused, I think, about how I was going to get into that world. And Tina and I both decided we were going to learn to play the guitar. And we, of course, had Vixen. You know, Vixen was the all-female band back then that we could, you know, check out on MTV and kind of idolize. But we kind of felt like we're going to do something different instead of just being like the girls on the videos. We want to be in a band ourselves. And so we're going to learn how to play guitar and we're going to be like these badass musicians. Now, I probably took guitar lessons for a solid maybe 5 months before I decided, I don't really see myself doing this. It hurt my fingers. It was not really all that fun or interesting to me. So the guitar thing never panned out. It's still sitting in my basement right now. Maybe one day I'll pick it back up. I do wish I would have learned how to play the piano. I still want to learn how to play the piano, but it's never happened. So.
We decided for our first ever episode that we're going to do sort of a thought exercise here. And the thought exercise is, imagine you had a time machine and you could go back in time to any era to see a concert, a tour, a band, whatever. Like I'm keeping it kind of loose at any point that you did not see in the past. Now, it doesn't have to be before you were born. Like, oh, I have to see the Beatles at Shea Stadium. No, nothing. It doesn't matter. It can be whatever you want it to be. But we decided we're both going to do 2 of them. And if you want, I will go first. We can alternate. We'll alternate. Okay. Now, my choice is I would go back in time to 1974 to the very first Kiss tour. Kiss is my favorite band, as almost everybody who watches this channel knows. But back in 1974, I'm saying their album came out in February of 74, their debut. They had never performed outside of New York City ever when they made their first album and it was released. So they were so green. And they went out in March of 1974, opening for literally anybody, playing high school gyms all the way up to arenas. There's very little footage that exists of Kiss at that time. I would like to see Kiss known as this massive band, this gigantic show, the legends, the bombs, the whatever, as a nobody band, as a band that drove around in a station wagon, okay, with their one 2 or 3 roadies or whatever, and they would walk out on stage in home bought leathers that they bought in like at New York City sex shops, showing up there and starting to play and having people point and laugh at them. Okay. It would just think like, how dumb is this band? Who are these idiots? And by like the third song, everyone was like, whoa, these guys are awesome. And just completely winning over the audience to a point where every group that they used to perform with in that on that first tour in 1974 ultimately kicked them off for just owning the audience because they were so much better than the groups that they were opening for. So for me, that's it. Seeing Kiss and no specific date or anything, but seeing Kiss in a gymnasium setting or a small time setting in 1974.
That's a pretty amazing one. I can get behind that. That would
You can
be
get behind that one. Because in my day, I didn't see Kiss for the first time until they had already taken the makeup off. So that was February 84, Civic Auditorium. Kiss was doing the Lick It Up tour with who are those openers? Vandenberg and Heaven. I don't know if anyone remembers them. Vandenberg later went on to join Whitesnake.
I was gonna say, was this Adrian Vandenberg?
It was Adrian Vandenberg. Yeah,
wow.
He had his own band just called Vandenberg at the time. And they
I
were
love Adrian Vandenberg, by the way.
Well, this was his thing. I can't recall too much about it, but because it was, it was 40 years ago, but they were the openers. So I didn't see Kiss until then. And if you were a Kiss fan in the 80s, you always had your eyes in the rear view.
I mean, I don't know if I can really top that because, that feels like so iconic. Like that feels like such a moment that I don't really know if I can even top that. But I'm going to say for my very first pick out of my two shows that I would have loved to have seen, I would have killed to see anything on the Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction tour, like the very first time GNR went out and played. And I didn't see Guns N' Roses for the first time live until I saw them at Austin City Limits in 2019, long after they had broken up, long after Appetite for Destruction was, in the rearview mirror by almost 30 years, because I believe that album came out in 1987. So I never got to see Guns N' Roses, period. I feel like Guns N' Roses got so big so fast that they were playing such large cities and arenas that I just didn't have access to easily at the time. And so, I was in 6th or 7th grade or 8th grade or whatever it was. And so I just never got a chance to see them until all the way into the, almost 2020, for crying out loud. So I would have loved to go back in time and seen them, in all their craziness, in all of Axl's dysfunctionality, the whole, like, I'll come on stage whenever I feel like it, attitude. Yeah. Like I would have loved to have seen them during that like crazy, wild, chaotic period.
Oh, absolutely. Me too. I didn't see them on that tour, but I did see Guns N' Roses on it was right before Use Your Illusion came out. It was a few months before it came out, and Skid Row was the opener, and they played at Alpine Valley because I was living in Wisconsin at the time. So it was playing at Alpine Valley, but we were like so far back, there was like reserved in the front and it's GA in the back, and we were way in the back, but whatever, we had tickets. And I can say that I saw I was there. I saw Guns N' Roses in almost the original lineup because Izzy Stradlin was there, but they didn't have the drummer. What's his name? Adler.
Yep, Steven Adler.
Right. He was already gone. They had the other guy in there. So I didn't see Guns N' Roses, the original lineup, but I saw close enough.
Yeah. Amazing.
But I mean, someday on another episode, maybe I'll give my theories about how Guns N' Roses should have just ended after Appetite for Destruction. So your first one was Guns N' Roses at any time on that first tour.
Yes.
87, absolutely. 88, when they were just coming up with Appetite for Destruction.
Yep.
Okay, so I will do my second one. And my second one is a little bit cheating because it's two bands, but I'm going to say it's not cheating because it is just one show, and it is the Black and Blue tour of 1980. Now, what this was Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult doing a co-headlining tour in 1980. And both of these bands are super significant 70s hard rock bands. Blue Oyster Cult and Black Sabbath. Okay, two of the biggest of the big. But they both had trouble transitioning into the 80s. This was the very beginning of the 80s. Black Sabbath was their first time touring with Dio as the singer. Blue Oyster Cult, their career was very up and down. They would have a record that would do really well and have like go platinum and have a hit on it, and then the next record would just do nothing. And they were doing this. I do have a prop here. So they were touring on this one here, Cultosaurus Erectus, their 1980 record. And then Black Sabbath was doing Heaven and Hell with Dio. Seeing those two bands together at that time, because I wouldn't have appreciated it in 1980 because I was 9 and I wasn't going to concerts. I hadn't heard Blue Oyster Cult. I don't know why I can't say that. I don't think I'd heard Blue Oyster Cult. I only knew Black Sabbath via Ozzy, and I don't remember caring about Black Sabbath without Ozzy until years later when I realized I really did give that version of the band sort of short shrift. So for me, it would be those two, the Black and Blue tour, because I do love Blue Oyster Cult. Never seen them still to this day. And Black Sabbath, who I have seen, but not with Ronnie James Dio. I did see them with Ozzy when they got back together. 2016, they played at the CHI Arena here in Omaha. And actually, it was the first night of the tour, of the leg of this tour was Omaha. And I had heard stories that, because Ozzy's voice was not doing that well that night. But I had heard that Ozzy had been in town for 2 or 3 days prior. And I'm like, well, he's an old man at this point. He knows better than to go out and party and stuff before the first night of the tour. No, apparently that was not the case. Like Ozzy was still kind of going nuts even in 2016, and that's why his voice was kind of shot.
But doesn't Ozzy still go nuts? Like I don't feel like Ozzy has any capability of learning from past mistakes. Like he just keeps going.
No,
he just keeps being Ozzy.
I mean, this throughout the 80s, he had so many weird looks, and he was kind of chubby, which wasn't really fitting with the sort of the theme. And sometimes he would have long hair and then he would shave his head and then he would do, he is the most nuts rock star, I think,
for sure,
that has sustained a career. Like you could find somebody that's a little crazier that had lasted for 2 years, but Ozzy, it's unbelievable that he's still among the living,
I was obsessed with the show The Osbournes, by the way. Remember the Osbournes?
Oh, absolutely. I remember the Osbournes. That was a great show.
I don't even, was it?
No, it was the early 2000s. It was probably 2003, maybe 2002, somewhere in that era.
I loved that show. And I think I loved it because it did kind of show Ozzy in a different light, from a different perspective, as more of this is what my home life is like. However, it was still chaotic and crazy and nutty. I don't think Ozzy really has a different mode or a different frame.
No, and they also owned the fact that Ozzy was pretty messed up most of the time when they were at home.
Gosh.
There was the idea that Ozzy had gotten sober a long time ago.
No.
He didn't, know. And in this case, he did not. He was not sober most of the time.
That's such an interesting segue into my next pick.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because my pick for the other show that I wish I would have seen is the Moscow Music and Peace Festival in 1989, where we had Skid Row and we had Bon Jovi and we had Motley Crue, and I think Ozzy was part of that.
He was.
All of these bands that came together under the premise of, I think there was some sort of a premise of sobriety and clean living and providing a good representation of the United States to go over to Moscow.
There was.
It was Music and Peace Festival, and yet they were all wasted the entire time.
They were all wasted, and you know what? It was, what you're talking about is accurate. It was that Doc McGee had part of his probation or whatever was he had to do good because he had been busted as a drug smuggler, and so this was his idea of, I'm going to do a concert for sobriety and all about it and whatever, and nobody was sober.
No, this was the height of say no to drugs. And this is your brain on drugs, the egg cracking in the frying pan. This was the height of all of that. And so I think all of, the kids, because really I was a child when this was happening, 1989, and in August of 89, I would have been heading into my sophomore year of high school. So probably 15 years old. And I think I kind of wanted to believe that these guys had gotten their lives together, that they had turned over a new leaf. Motley Crue in particular had kind of been very well publicized as having been on, this like bender for a decade. And due to all kinds of things that were happening within the band, a lot of them, I think, had sort of proclaimed that they were getting sober, or they were getting off of drugs or something like that, but that was not actually the case. Regardless, I would have loved to have seen this concert in August of '89 in Moscow. I think it would have been the biggest train wreck, but also the best music you could imagine. Because I think John Bon Jovi actually wrote some letter of recommendation to try to get Doc McGee to have like an easier sentence, or, not as severe of punishment or something like that. Like John actually wrote some sort of a letter to try to boost his character. But yeah, Doc McGee was a power player back then.
Oh, he
was.
He
also got himself into quite a bit of trouble. And, I cannot imagine though, from Doc McGee's perspective, like trying to manage bands that were as massive as Bon Jovi and also as massive and dysfunctional as a Motley Crue, and trying to like keep all of that together. It would have been
because I could see working with Bon Jovi, and you could have a conversation with John Bon Jovi in a room and sit there and be like, okay, here's what's going on. We need to have a rational conversation. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was anyone in Motley Crue in like 1985, for example, that you could have a rational conversation with, because they were so out of control.
Yeah, extremely out of control.
Being in Russia would be weird, especially back then, because people didn't know how to handle it. Like the security guards would see someone dancing, and you heard stories of them like beating people up with their one of the rifles, because they didn't know it. They didn't get it. Like they hadn't seen people freaking out like this in terms of a concert. But yeah, that would have been cool. And being over on that plane. I mean, I can't believe they took the same plane. Like, what happens if that plane had gotten in a it had wrecked or something, or crashed, and you just killed every single major rock star, like from that year, all in one. I mean, I just seem like they would be traveling in separate planes. You know what I mean?
Well, talk to Doc McGee. He should have coordinated that a little bit more.
He should have coordinated that a little bit better. Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So I think this is pretty much going to wrap up our first episode, and hopefully we'll be doing this monthly coming up for Rock of Aging here on The Dark Stuff. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. This is the end of the episode. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This was our first episode, so it is a continuingly evolving concept here. If you have any suggestions for other topics you'd maybe like us to explore, please leave those in the comments. As always, take care. Bye-bye.
So, you have a MySpace page or something?